the December 21st, 2020 meeting of the Planning Commission Working Group. Ms. Cook, would you please call the roll?
Yes. Mr. O'Connor?
Here.
Thank you. Mr. O'Connor is an at-large member. Ms. Leverins?
Here.
Ms. Leverins is also an at-large member. Mr. Haldeman?
Here.
Mr. Haldeman represents the Berkeley District. Mr. Polster?
Here.
Mr. Polster represents the Jamestown District. Dr. Rose?
Here.
Dr. Rose represents the Roberts District. Ms. Null?
Present.
Ms. Null represents the Stonehouse District. Mr. Kropp?
Here.
Mr. Kropp represents the Powhatan District and is chair of the Planning Commission. Ms. Wortman? Ms. Wortman?
Oh, sorry. I was muted. I apologize. I'm here.
Okay. Thank you. Ms. Wortman represents the community participation team, and we have a quorum. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cook. Everyone received the virtual resolution in their packets, which allows us to conduct this meeting this afternoon. And just in summary, on September 8th, 2020, the Board of Supervisors readopted the Continuity of Government Ordinance, which under certain circumstances permits this committee to conduct today's meeting by electronic or telephonic means without a quorum of members physically present. May I have a motion for adoption of that resolution for this afternoon's meeting?
So moved.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Also, although we do not have a formal public hearing period, we do afford the public an opportunity to express themselves, whether it be through emails or voice messages or other correspondence to staff for the PC working group. Ms. Cook, were there any comments submitted by the public for this meeting?
No, there were not.
Okay, thank you. And since you have the floor, if you'd be so kind as to introduce the staff and consultants.
Yes, thank you. I'm Ellen Cook, Principal Planner, and joining me today from James City County are Paul Holt, Tammy Rosario, Thomas Wysong, Tori Haynes, Tom Leininger, and John Reisinger. Also joining us are partners in this comprehensive plan update, our consultants Vlad Gavrilovic and Todd Gordon from EPRPC. Thank you.
Thank you. And before we get into the next agenda item on in today's meeting, I do want to mention one thing. And one of the few perks, or probably the only perk, to chairing one of these meetings is to be able to call a recess if necessary. And I do want to come out and just say that I'm planning to call a recess from 5:30 to 5:45 this afternoon. If we are not finished with our meeting by 5:30, all of the land use issues that are on the agenda we have discussed previously, and so the meeting may go a little more quickly. But if not, I'll call a recess at 5:30 to 5:45. And you probably, this is not news to anybody, but tonight, right after sunset, the Jupiter and Saturn are going to converge, and they're going to be the closest they've been in 800 years. And since I'm not anticipating being around for the next such close convergence, I thought that I'd call a break and let those PC working group and staff members who would like to go out and try to look into the sky to see it, an opportunity to do that. It'll be
were you around for the last one, Rich?
In spirit only, Jack. But it'll be in the southwest sky, and probably based on when sunset is tonight, it'll probably start being visible a little before 5:30 and last for maybe a half an hour. It's going to be fairly low in the horizon, so the planets will dip below the horizon in a relatively short order. But at any rate, that's been the media has been referring to it as the Christmas star, and I thought I'd try to give everybody an opportunity to do that, since It's that time of year.
Well, thank you.
You bet. Now we'll get right back into the rest of the agenda. Next item are the minutes of the October 19th, 2020 Planning Commission Working Group meeting. Are there any edits or corrections or a motion to approve?
Alderman moves approval.
Thank you. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? All right. We'll now go into the land use materials. And Thomas, are you going to kick the first part of this off?
Yes, I will be.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll just turn it over to you then.
Great. Thank you. And good evening to the Planning Commission Working Group. I want to begin by thanking each of you for your detailed comments and thoughts on the Land Use Technical Report, Community Guidance Summary, and Open Space Memo from our previous meeting on December 7th. There was a lot of great discussion and input that will help us prepare this section as we move forward. Those items have not been revised for tonight's meeting, but are provided as a reference. And I did want to provide a brief update regarding the Jcsa Independent Water Systems Analysis. Staff did forward the emailed questions that we had received from you all regarding the independent water systems. We sent that to Jcsa, and they were kind enough to give us some good answers, which are included in tonight's cover memo. And as you may recall from the previous meeting, staff is willing to prepare the analysis that's described in attachment 2.7 for the working group's consideration, which could be beneficial should you all be interested in exploring eliminating the independent water systems requirement and or providing guidance on other changes to the rural lands, land use designation description language, policy texts, or JCSAs later in the process. So unless there are any objections raised this evening, staff does intend to commence with preparing that analysis that would show the effect of eliminating that requirement. So if I may, I just pause there and check and see if that's acceptable to you all, and see if there are any questions about JCSA's response.
I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Yes, I think that'd be a great idea, Thomas. And so I haven't heard anything to the contrary. So why doesn't staff go ahead and pursue that next step?
Mr. Chairman, this is Jack. I have no objection to it. In fact, I would welcome it also. But would it be possible to work into that analysis the amount that we would have to charge on a new hookup fee from the $8,000? You know, what would it take to create a neutral fiscal condition for the county? It's a hard question because we don't know exactly where the next application is going to come from in the rural lands. We don't know what kind of investment returns the pool is going to have, particularly in this era of zero interest rates. And but you know, if you could somehow cuff it, because I think that should be another option is to raise the hookup fee from, or maybe even raise the water rates for wells to just not to make a profit, just to keep the rest of the county whole.
Tom,
Yes.
Is that doable, do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. We can certainly pass that along to JCSA to see if they provide that fiscal analysis, and then we could certainly include that as part of what we prepare, definitely.
Thanks, Tom.
Okay.
Thomas.
All right. All right, then I guess the second part is the future land use map materials. So Thomas, I assume it's still in your court?
Yep, you got it. And before we dive into the future land use map spreadsheet discussion and voting, staff thought it would be helpful for the listening public who may have missed our previous meeting for us to provide just a brief overview of the spreadsheet. And minimal changes have been made, so much of this will sound familiar to you all. But essentially, the spreadsheet contains the applications for land use designation changes that are being considered at this point, as well as those potential applications that could proceed with your recommendation, which are the subject of tonight's voting. So as you all may remember, there are currently 12 land use designation change applications that are certain to move forward for review and consideration by the working group and the Board of Supervisors, 3 of which are property owner initiated and 9 of which are county initiated. And these applications are not subject to a straw vote tonight. But in addition to these applications, there are the PCWG member recommendation changes and the scenario B difference changes, both of which are subject to straw votes by the working group this evening. And the PCWG member recommendation land use designation changes are areas within the county that have been identified by you all via emails and in meetings as places to look at changing as part of the comp plan update. And using your input from the previous December meeting, staff has updated the proposed land use column for some of these applications to provide either A, potential land use designations that fit the discussion you all were having, or B, potential non-land use designation change land use policies that might be better suited for accomplishing the same goals. And these text changes are colored red within the spreadsheet. And of course, staff's hope is that the working group will continue to discuss and review these land use designation changes and vote on which ones to proceed with this evening. As I mentioned, staff also compared the land use types that are shown on scenario map B to the currently adopted future land use map to identify areas of difference between the two. And these scenario B difference land use designation changes are also for the working group's consideration and voting. Regarding the spreadsheet, each application or potential application is identified by a unique ID number within the spreadsheet and shown on the attached future land use map, which will be pulled up here shortly. And in addition to information about location, zoning, and a current and potential land use designation, the spreadsheet includes an initial assessment of the application's consistency with the 6 key ideas from the preferred scenario framework. I do want to mention that separate from the worksheet, the consultant team has also provided information regarding the jobs and population allocation shown for both scenario A and B. Analysis in the spreadsheet, however, is still based on the 6 key ideas from the preferred scenario framework. And of course, while land use designation change is the most direct way to address land use matters for a specific parcel, there are other policy options that can do so on a broader scale. These include changing the description of land use designations, such as the density, develop, and design standards, revising policies within the technical report, adding or enhancing the GSAs, and so on. So there may be proposed designation changes that are not recommended tonight via your vote, but that certainly doesn't mean that it's the end of the line for the discussion for those items. And that naturally brings us to the discussion that the working group had at the last meeting about potential land use designation to be more inclusive of certain properties. And as referenced in the memo in your packet, the county could rename this designation to community character conservation or something similar, which could then be applied to land use in the PSA that is appropriate for property, whether that's owned publicly or privately, or to be used for agricultural, forestal, nature, resource-based, or similar uses, but is distinct from the rural lands. The reason I bring that up is because some of the proposed designation changes actually assume that you all would be making that change to revise that land use designation. And that's certainly fine, but staff thought it would be helpful if we could pause here and get a straw vote from you all on whether or not we should proceed with assuming that we will explore modifying the open space or recreation designation. So if I could pause here, and I can certainly repeat the question if that would be helpful, but we did want to see if the working group is comfortable with revising that language in the future.
So
assuming that.
I'm sorry, just to clarify, what we're doing is taking a straw vote on whether staff would proceed with developing a definition similar to community character conservation that could be applied for rural lands within the PSA rather than trying to pick a zoning designation or something like that. So that this would just give more flexibility to lands within the PSA that we don't want to develop in an intense manner. Is that right, Thomas?
Yes, and to clarify a little better on my end, the reason I'm bringing it up now before we go into the spreadsheet is because we do have, and I don't have the ID number right in front of me, but one of the recommended changes in the spreadsheet was to be open space or recreation, but I believe there's an asterisk that says revised. Mm-hmm. And so before we get into that discussion, I want to make sure that the working group or staff wants to make sure the working group's comfortable revising that language. And the reason for that is that if we don't revise it, that proposed land use as it's written really wouldn't be a good fit for what's being proposed. So just wanted to check on that before getting into the discussion.
Okay. Well, I for one think that makes sense, and I could throw it out. Just all those in favor of staff pursuing that idea of developing a better definition, please say aye. Or if you have please say aye, and then we'll see if anybody disagrees with that approach.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Opposed?
I'm unclear as to what parcel we're talking about. Because we the last time we were going to talk about 13, 14, and 23, and now we're just talking about 13, which is...
Frank, this is Julie. I think I started this by suggesting that parcel that was proposed for a strip shopping center across from Monticello Marketplace could well just be designated like a pocket park or something, but to create that as green space as opposed to something else.
Mm-hmm. And
we
so
don't have, right now, we don't have a designation within the PSA that would preserve something as open green space or recreational use.
So are we talking about parcel 13 map ID or not?
We're not. No, we're talking
Okay,
just
good.
conceptually.
All right.
We're talking conceptually.
Could we be?
And we could, once Thomas starts going through the land use applications that were suggested by the working group. But right now, what we're just trying to do is get the okay to come up with maybe a better working definition that could apply to other parcels if need be, for the comprehensive plan, just to not make it as restrictive as it is.
The parcel that I was looking at was number 19, but it was not limited to just that. There were others that we talked about that it might apply to also.
Correct.
Thank you, Julie. I'm clear now that we're not, and my vote is yay.
Okay. Thank you, Frank. All right, Thomas, back to you.
Great. With that being said, we can now move into the spreadsheet itself. And for the benefit of the listening public, staffs, I'm going to go ahead and give a brief summary of each of the first 12 land use applications that are sure to proceed, and again, are not subject to a vote tonight. Once we move into the working group category, staff's hope is to give a brief overview of each application, but then have the working group discuss and then vote before moving on to the next application. So instead of me going through all of them and then circling back, I'm going to give a summary of the first 12, and then we'll go one by one. And I did want to pause here because I'm not sure if the working group had some information they wanted to share about the way they wanted to have the votes be, or I think we have an even number of folks on the call, so there could be a 4-4 situation. Mr. Kropp, I didn't know if you wanted to throw that over to the working group for discussion on an instance where we have an even vote, whether we proceed. That's certainly a working group decision to make, but I did want to put that out there before going into the spreadsheet.
And to clarify, by proceeding, what we're doing tonight, in my mind anyway, is we're deciding from number 13 on whether we're going to ask staff to do a staff report on that particular change in preparation for a public meeting, not a public hearing, but a public meeting that'll take place later in the spring, probably in March or so. So what we're doing is we're saying, okay, of the ones that have been submitted by the Planning Commission Working Group, we think this one should go forward for a more detailed staff analysis and a written staff report and subsequent public meeting, or there might be some of these initiatives where the working group feels that we don't really need to pursue that. Is that how staff's interpreting it as well?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
And at this point, property owners will be notified. Is that not correct?
Yeah. So the applications that you all vote for tonight will be essentially added to the list of ones that are going forward, and then those applications will go through the notification process.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. And so in the event of a tie, I don't know. It seems to me that if it's not a clear majority, the application should not move forward. That off the top of my head is my thought, and I'm certainly could be persuaded otherwise. But in the event of a tie on a parcel, if there's a better way to do it.
Mr. Chairman, I look at it the other way. I think we're not, that should be the case, I guess, if we were the final word, but we're not. What we're doing is forwarding it for further analysis, and ultimately, of course, the Board of Supervisors will vote on it. I would think that a 50-50 vote under those circumstances should move forward, since it's not the final word. But that's just my opinion.
No, that's fine as well. I mean, we do, when we have land use cases come before the Planning Commission, it goes forward to the board. If there's a tie vote, it goes forward with no recommendation. But I'm just thinking from the standpoint, if it is a tie, the amount of analysis and effort that would have to go into the staff report to take it to the next level. But how about some other working group members? Any thoughts on what to do?
This is Julie. I agree with Jack.
Okay. Frank?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, if we're tied, then, it should go forward.
Okay. All right. It seems like that's a good sampling. Any other comments one way or the other on that issue?
No, Barbara, I agree.
Okay.
Go forward.
All right. All right, Thomas, it looks like the majority is in agreement that if there is a tie vote, it'll go forward anyway.
All right, great. So now we can get into the spreadsheet and map ID number 1. This is land use 20-0001. This is a property owner initiated application. It's described as the Marston parcels. The property is currently vacant. It's not within the PSA. It is designated for rural lands, and the proposal would be for low density residential, with this being added to the PSA, and this would be for a residential subdivision. Moving on to ID number 2, this is also a property owner initiated application. This is described as the Eastern State Newtown Edition, and this currently is within the PSA. It is designated for federal, state, and county land, and it is proposed for mixed use, for a mixed-use development that would be added to Newtown. Land use 20-003, this is also property owner initiated. This is described as Eastern State Mixed-Use Community. This is within the PSA. It is designated for federal, state, and county land. The proposed land use is mixed use, and this would be for mixed-use development. Land use 20-004, this is a county-initiated application. This property is currently located within the PSA. It is designated for federal, state, and county land, and the proposed land use is low-density residential. This is simply a housekeeping item to make sure that we're not designating a private residence for school use when there's no intention for the school to use that. Moving on to 20-005, this is a county-initiated application. It's described as the Stonehouse Tract. This property is currently within the PSA. It is designated for low-density residential within the PSA, and this proposed land use would be rural lands outside the PSA. And due to changes in the Stonehouse Master Plan, this property is planned for rural preservation instead of residential development, which is the rationale for that proposal. Moving on to number 6, land use 20-006. This is also county initiated. It's described as a PSA adjustment, The current land use designation is rural lands and low density residential. The proposed land use is outside the PSA and rural lands. And the rationale is that if the PSA is revised for the Stonehouse parcel, it's logical to continue the revision of the PSA for continuity. And of course, we've had public input about the need to preserve rural lands. Number 7 is a county initiated. It's described as mainland farm. This property is also within the PSA. It's designated for low density residential. The proposed land use is open space or recreation. And the reason for this is that this property is a historic working farm that is owned by the county. The next one is land use 20-008. This is county initiated as well. It's described as Powhatan Creek wetlands, This property is inside the PSA, and it is currently designated for low density residential, and the proposed land use is open space or recreation. And the reason for this is that the parcels are environmentally constrained and not suitable for any sort of development. The next one is also county initiated. This is the Jcsa Tuning Road Office and Convenience Center. This property is in the PSA. It's designated for mixed use Newtown/federal, state, and county land. And this is also a housekeeping item to change it to federal, state, and county land. And the reason for this is the property is owned by Jcsa and is utilized for public service. The next item is land use 20-0010. This is county initiated. This is described as the brickyard parcels. This property is currently is not within the PSA. It's designated for rural lands, and the proposed land use is open space or recreation. And the reason for this is that the county is in the process and may have already purchased the larger parcel as a potential passive park. The next item is land use 20-0011. This is county initiated. This is described as the Winston Terrace stream restoration. And this property is within the PSA, and it is designated for community commercial. Excuse me, I'm sorry, I lost my place here on the screen. Let me back up here a second. Yes, I'm sorry, this is designated for community commercial, and the proposal would be for low density residential. And that is because less intensive development, that is no development, is preferred for the site due to environmental constraints. And then the final application that's sure to proceed is also county initiated. This is the Grove Convenience Center site. This property is in the PSA. It's designated for limited industry, and the proposed land use would be federal, state, and county land. And the reason for this is that the county purchased this property for the Grove Convenience Center. So this would simply be to bring that property's designation in accordance with its planned use. And so I'll just stop there before we get into the meat of the discussion on the next items. Were there any questions currently about the first 12 land use applications?
Okay, go ahead, Thomas.
All right, so now we're on to number 13, and this is a PCWG member recommendation. This is described as the parcels between Oakland Farms and Richmond Road. And if the PSA were adjusted, more parcels would need to be removed as well for consistency, meaning this would be a change for this area instead of just one parcel. This property is located inside the PSA. It's designated currently for low density residential / moderate density residential. And the proposed use would be rural lands / outside the PSA. And the red text that staff has added based on your public input and for your information states that since this is not adjacent to the PSA line, approximately 45 other parcels would be affected. If the working group was not comfortable with this approach, other choices could be to designate the entire parcel as low density residential or to consider a modified open space designation. And I will stop there and turn it back over to you all for discussion.
Any discussion? And Jack, this was one of yours, I believe.
This is mine. I sent around a mea culpa this morning. I should have looked more broadly, but rural lands is certainly not practical. The other options could be a rezoning to R6, low density residential, but that's not what we're here for tonight. Or the new community character conservation title might apply here, and then there are zoning ordinance amendments that may apply for setbacks and right of way and so forth. But so I'm not sure how to proceed here. I'm not sure whether I'd vote for this myself, even though it's mine. And the same with the next one. But the important part to me is that we just absolutely have to have a break in development between Croker Road and Tuano. It's critical for the environmental and quality of life and economic and fiscal health of the whole county, in my opinion, and transportation, which is quality of life, of course. And if this Lightfoot Norge sprawl continues west all the way out to the Barnesville interchange, it's not going to end well for the county. So I just hope wherever we go with this, we can come up with a pretty good solution.
Thank you, Jack. Currently on the land use map, it's designated as low density residential or moderate density residential. I'm gathering from the spreadsheet. And to Jack's point, there are, we could recommend applying that new community character conservation designation to it. We could, I guess, opt for no designation change on the new future land use map. But I personally agree with Jack from the standpoint that I think we have to be very careful not to put mechanisms in place that would allow the same type of sprawl or the community merging that we see from Lightfoot to Norge. And I think, thank you, Jack, for highlighting that as a concern. And I agree with Jack on that. It's just a question of, what land use designation we want on this parcel. And so with that, I'm going to be quiet and turn it over to my colleagues for a recommendation or a discussion as to whether this should go forward or not. Oh, there's Frank.
From the very beginning, my objection has been not to have this thing as RHD. And so I'm good if it remains low density, but I am dead set against this going to RHD, period.
RHD being?
What it was designated in the scenario B is high density R5.
Oh, right, got it. Yep. Rob, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I have a question, and maybe to Jack's point, I really just don't understand something that you said about how more development would be an economic problem for the county. And I'm wondering if you could just explain it.
Well, yes. The comprehensive plan and the Business Climate Task Force report and a number of other county studies have made the point that our rural and historic ambiance community character is integrally related to our economy. And with the implication that if that goes, so goes the economy. And so that was the basis of that. And if the economy starts to go, now I was a little too casual with the word development because there are all kinds of developments, of course. And if you get a real high quality industrial development, that's a fiscal positive, no question, in my opinion, no question about it, or a good office building that with professional salaries and that sort of thing. It's the suburban sprawl, residential sprawl, that is a fiscal and economic negative, and it will corrupt the whole plan for Toronto, in my opinion. And I mean, I don't.
Oh, that's helpful. I appreciate it.
Okay. The other thing, if you look at places like Fairfax and Loudoun County and so forth, they've gotten away with this sprawl because they have access to a wealth of high-paying jobs in Washington, D.C. and so forth. We don't. And so if you just have sprawl and not the high-paying jobs to support it, you get it. The tax rate in Fairfax County is $1.13, and ours is 84 cents, the real estate tax. Their cost of government is much higher than ours, despite the higher density. You would think there'd be economies of scale, but there aren't. And again, they can afford it because they have high-paying jobs. And, the examples go on and on. So.
Jenny, I see your hand up.
Yes, it's because I get easily confused about these things. The present designation is low density, medium density, right? And if it were, I don't understand how those translate to the number of units per acre you can have. So what is low density 1 unit per acre? Or what is that?
Yeah, yes, low density is one unit per acre. It's also zoned R5, which is multifamily housing, which...
Sorry, apologies.
Well, Ellen, take it away. You know much more about this than I do.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to mention for LDR, the recommended density as currently written in the low density residential description language is between 1 and 4 dwelling units per acre. With anything over 1, the county would typically seek to see some really enhanced public benefits like affordable housing or enhanced environmental protection. But it would allow up to 4. If someone came in for rezoning for R2, for example, they could propose something at 2 or 3, and then it would just come down to the particulars of the application as to what sort of the consistency with the designation language. For moderate density residential, the recommended per unit density would be between 4 and 12 units per acre. Again, for the higher end of that range, typically looking for enhanced public benefit.
Thank you. Well, I guess my view on this is that I'm certainly opposed to moderate, and probably opposed to developing with more than 1 per acre. So I don't know what the new designation opportunities would lead to in terms of development, but thank you for answering the question.
Would you explain maybe a little bit, Ellen, this might be helpful, community character conservation, if that concept was adopted and applied to this particular parcel that we're talking about, how would that look?
Yes, so that's something that, since it's not in existence now, I think we can kind of only talk in terms of concepts that staff has been considering and then sharing with you all. Mm-hmm. But certainly we would put pen to paper and come up with some draft language for you all to consider. I think so far what staff had envisioned was something, right now, the sort of least intense land use designation within the primary service area is pretty much low density residential. In terms of what is typically applied to privately owned land. We do have what is currently open space and recreation that's over for some of our parks and other areas. Most typically that has been applied to publicly owned land. So returning back over to the open space and recreation side, we could expand that a little bit so it could be applied to a range of different ownership situations and broaden it a little bit, maybe to encompass agricultural, forestal, or natural resource type uses, and potentially with a little bit of an angle to it regarding character preservation within the county. But I wish I had an exact written out set of language for you at this point, but that's yet to come. Sure. But that was what was in our minds as of yet.
Okay, thank you. Julie, you had your hand?
Yes, thank you. It seems to me from this discussion that since we're just voting on whether to carry this application forward, I would like to propose that, yes, we should carry this one forward because clearly the level of discussion warrants further consideration.
I think that's a great suggestion. Frank, did you want to add to that?
It's probably more for Ellen. If I may be incorrect about this, but on the Armistead property for parcel 31201-00017, it's zoned rural residential R8, and it's inside the PSA, and the minimum lot size is 3 acres.
3 acre, yeah.
So I guess my question to the staff is, I don't know that I'm hearing anybody saying that we should go forward with RHD, but I am hearing something lower in the density. So the question, Ellen, is, besides the open space, is it possible that it could be R8?
Well, and I think it's important here, and I may be misunderstanding, so let me know if I am. I think it's important to remember the distinction between the zoning districts and comprehensive plan land use designations. So an R8 is a zoning district, and it has certain requirements within the zoning district, and it's separate from what would be like a LDR, a low density residential comprehensive plan designation, or a potentially modified open space comprehensive plan designation, which have recommended densities, but are separate tools than a zoning district. I don't know if that addresses what you were looking for.
So in the comp plan, it's A1 with a zoning of R8. So how could I get a comp plan that will lead to an R8 designation?
Oh, I see what you're saying. All right, I think so. I don't know that this 100% will address what you're looking for. I think I know where you're going with that, but the R8 zoning district within the county, I don't know all the history to it, but it's often been viewed as a sort of a holding zoning that often there's a different comprehensive plan designation over the top of it that sets forth the longer term vision. So you'll see a lot of R8 zone land in the county that has like an LDR designation or some other designation that sets forth the long-term vision for it. It's interesting question. Often it's more so you have something zoned R8 and there's a comprehensive plan designation of mixed use, for example, and then that would rezone to mixed use. There isn't necessarily a comprehensive plan designation that R8 implements, so to speak. Although certainly Tammy or others on the call, if you have any thoughts to add into that, I'd welcome your historical perspective.
I think Ellen covered the great majority of it, just that there were slightly different requirements for A1 and R8 as far as zoning requirements went. Over time, they sort of evolved into very similar ones, but A1 being applied for the most part and kept in areas outside the primary service area, and R8 being for the most part applied inside the PSA, and something that was an initial designation or district for it, and that would eventually be expected might evolve into a more intense zoning district in concert with what the land use designation was for the property. So as Ellen implied, sort of a holding zone, and the land use designations typically for R8 areas within inside the primary service area, have been a variety of things, but it would be something that the property would essentially be rezoned in a manner that would be compatible with that land use designation, whether it be low density residential or something more intense. I hope that provided some additional clarification.
Oh, no, that helped. And I'm within agreement with Julie about going forward, as long as there's an understanding that we're not going forward to try to put RHD on there. And if we can, we don't want MDR.
And just, Tim had his hand up, so, but just to clarify, Frank, by moving it forward in the interim till we see it again, staff will do a staff report and analysis and make some recommendations, and then we would sort out what we think would be the recommended future land use. So at this point, to what Julie said, what's on the table is just whether to move it forward for more study. Tim, you've been patient.
Okay. No, I'm here. I guess one question I have is, Jack, I'd like to understand what your definition of Toano is. Meaning, Toano stretches from, here at Bush Springs Road out to Stonehouse. So I don't know if Jack's talking about that whole stretch of parcel or what his definition of it is. And I guess where I'm really struggling through this whole process, we've spent, a fair amount of time just talking about one parcel, and we're not understanding the impacts in total. And it's kind of this whole scenario B discussion, and I just think I'm not a big fan of how much we have made our reliance upon such a small segment of the population creating input, but that portion of the population that's responded has said they're willing to accept higher density inside the PSA. And so we've got a lot of arguments about lessening density inside the PSA. So I'm content with the current land use designation that's on that parcel. I'm content to leave it that way. If there's a compelling argument after we get through the rest of the list, I'm happy to hear it. But we're going to, based on some of Frank's analysis from our last discussion, there's probably some parcels in here that we're going to pull out. And then we're just going to end up, to me, back to where we began. So I'm content to leave that parcel alone and move forward.
Hi, the definition from the comprehensive plan is the developed land within the vicinity of Toano is composed of smaller retail, limited industrial, moderate density residential uses. As part of the 1997 comprehensive plan review, the Toano mixed use area was expanded to include the area fronting on the southwestern side of Richmond Road between Chickahominy Road and Bush Springs Road. Now, I know there's more to Toano than that, but I don't think it runs, at least my idea of it, doesn't run east of Bush Springs Road. Maybe that's not right, but that's my impression.
No, I appreciate, but the mailing address for Stonehouse is Toano. So my question is, are you looking at Toano just being the corner of Forge Road, the intersection of Forge Road and Route 60, or are you looking at it to be the broader piece? I just
somewhere in between. I'm glad you brought that up because I'm somewhere in between. I certainly don't include Stonehouse as part of Toano. My mailing address is Williamsburg, and I live. It takes me almost 20 minutes to drive into Williamsburg. But it's that business district in Toano.
Right.
And let me switch over to Paul. He has his hands up and might have some clarifying information.
Well, I was just going to add to the conversation that Ellen and Tammy had started so well, and just to add a bit to the implementation piece for Ms. Wortman's benefit. So, if ultimately the Planning Commission Working Group wants to move forward, then I think that's fine. I think what would be helpful information for staff is whether or not you want to move forward with a low density residential designation or something less than that, which would probably be that modified open space piece. As Ellen mentioned, the low density residential designation is generally supportive of units ranging from 1 to 4 dwelling units an acre. The distinction being, of course, with the additional legislative approval that's needed for anything, for any rezonings anyway, but the additional level of legislative approval for any applications that propose anything above 1 dwelling unit an acre. So, I say that to say, if the consensus is you want to move forward with, say, a low density residential, because it's a blend of those designations now, both low density residential and moderate density residential. The low density residential designation does not mean ultimately that a future rezoning or a future legislative request is bound or somehow obligated to approve up to 4 dwelling units an acre. That legislative process that would occur in the future would ultimately decide whether or not that specific proposal would be okay. But it would just sort of set it out saying, look, the desired goal here is between 1 and 4 if you make it consistent low density residential versus the current mix of both, which would imply that some portion of that property would be suitable for a higher designation. So again, moving forward, I think it would be helpful if there was some indication on whether or not you wanted to leave it in that low density residential range, or ultimately your goal was to shoot for something less than that. That would help us with next steps.
Well, what I heard from the team members who spoke, it seems like low density is preferred to moderate or higher density for that parcel. So just to throw something out there, do you want to do a straw vote to say move this application forward and ask staff to look at it as future land use of low density residential instead of the current future land use of low and moderate density residential?
I'm good with that.
Yes, go ahead.
Would you like me to do a roll call vote for this one, or were you looking for a voice vote?
Sure. We probably should do roll calls on these, Ellen. Thank you for clarifying that.
Certainly, yeah. Okay, so it sounds as though the straw vote is for a potential change to low density residential. Mr. Kropp?
Aye.
Mr. Haldeman?
Aye.
Ms. Leverins?
Aye.
Ms. Null?
Aye.
Mr. O'Connor?
No.
Mr. Polster?
Aye.
Dr. Rose?
Aye.
Ms. Wortman?
Aye.
It looks as though there are the majority who would like to do that, and it would therefore continue in the process that way.
Thank you all. Thomas, I guess, do you tee up the next one?
Sure. And I will say for number 14, this is one of the applications that has an asterisk on it, and that's because number 23 also involves this parcel. And there's a note at the very bottom of the spreadsheet that I want to point out that essentially says, because those are distinctly different land use designations that are being proposed, you're not going to be able to recommend pursuing both of these. One of them would have to be picked. So I wanted to point that out. And with that being said, I can do a summary of 14 and 23 at the same time, or we can go just in the normal order and get to 23 eventually. So I'll leave that up to the working group with how you want to address it.
I vote for both.
Okay.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Great. So, and I believe they're grouped together on the map, which should be helpful. But for number 14, this is a working group recommendation. It's titled as the parcel near the northwest side of the Croker Road / Richmond Road intersection. And if the PSA were adjusted, more parcels would need to be removed as well for consistency, meaning this would be a change for this area instead of just for one parcel. This property is within the PSA, and it is designated for low density residential / mixed use. And you will see the red text here in your spreadsheet. The proposed change rather is for rural lands / outside the PSA. And it does state that since this is not adjacent to the PSA line, approximately 47 other parcels would be affected. If the working group was not comfortable with this approach, another choice discussed by the working group was included limited industry as the option for this parcel. And then I'll scroll down here to 23, if you'll bear with me here just for a minute, make sure my computer cooperates. And this was a scenario B difference. And this is also titled as the parcel adjacent to the northwest of Croker and Richmond Road. And it's the same information. It's within the PSA. And the current land use designation is still low density residential / mixed use. But in order to match up with the scenario B map, the proposal would be for moderate / high density residential. And so that is different from number 14, where the proposal would, the proposal was rural lands and outside the PSA. And I'll turn it back over to you all.
Right. And to clarify, this is the parcel that's directly across from the CNF Bank on the corner of Croker and Richmond. Is that correct?
Right.
To be honest, I'm not as familiar as where the bank is. I know it's addressed as off of Cokes Lane, but if anybody else on staff knows that area pretty well and knows the bank, feel free to weigh in.
Rich, you're correct. It's the parcel between Richmond Road and the apartment complex going up Croker Road. So it's right there on that corner.
Yeah, and I wanted to have everybody be able to visualize that because it's that elevated parcel. The corner, the building across the street is the CNF Bank, and it is right there on that intersection and south of the affordable housing complex. Okay, just wanted to get it clear in everybody's mind and open it for discussion.
This is Ellen, sorry. I think the one that we're looking at now is, and we may want to flip over to property information, just a little bit of a clarification. I think it's not the one directly at the corner on the northwest side, which is designated mixed use. It's slightly further west than that.
Okay.
So if you all recall the rezoning, the Oakland Point rezoning from a few years ago, it's almost across the street from that, north-south across the street, okay. And then even a little bit to the west. So if you look at where the map is, where the comma is, oh, thank you. Yeah, thanks, John. So it kind of, Cokes Lane kind of bifurcates the parcel that John has highlighted there.
Okay. All right, any discussion?
I'm sorry, which parcel is it now, in brown? Ah, yes, okay. I thought that was number 14.
It is, I think.
Okay, so which one is number 23?
The same parcel is involved in a Planning Commission Working Group member suggestion and a Scenario B difference suggestion. So, yeah, one of them is a suggestion to potentially have higher intensity in the form of moderate or high density residential, whereas the other one is a suggestion to have something less intense on that parcel. I believe one of them has one additional parcel involved in it, but both of them do have that one parcel involved, I believe.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
So by lumping both of these together, I'm going to turn to staff for advice on the best way to address it. I mean, it seems to me that we are almost going to have to deal with them separately to some degree. I mean, we can talk about them because of their geographic proximity to each other, but don't we have to address 14 and 23 sort of independently also?
Yes, it might be something you all could consider doing multiple votes if you wanted to start off with whichever one and then see if the group felt consensus on one thing. But if there wasn't, you could see as a group if there was consensus for a different designation. But it might make sense to, well, I guess it would be up to you all where you wanted to start as to which designation you wanted to test out as a group to see if there was consensus.
I'm agreeable to go 14, and I don't see any difference between that and number 13 in that I don't want RHD or any high density. I'm happy with the suggestion from staff, at least on 14, to do LDR open space and go forward.
Yes, Barbara, I agree with that.
Jack also.
Julie also.
Ellen, do you want to call the roll on that one then, since we've had 4 people verbally weigh in on that?
Certainly, yes. So I believe this vote would be for a potential change for the portion of the parcel that is not already LDR to make the entire thing LDR. And I will go ahead. Mr. Kropp?
Aye.
Mr. Holdeman?
Aye.
Ms. Leverins?
Aye.
Ms. Knoll?
Aye.
Mr. O'Connor?
No.
Mr. Polster?
Aye.
Dr. Rose?
Aye.
Ms. Wortman?
Aye.
Thank you. It appears there's a consensus on, or there are more votes for aye on that one to move that forward.
What about number 23? Do you all want to, since we are talking, to maybe call up that detailed parcel map again that shows both of them next to each other as a point of reference? Okay, so 23 is the one on the right. Okay.
This is Julie. I recommend we vote on the same thing to take the mixed use portion and make it low density.
All right.
Jack agrees.
Okay. So
I mean,
there is a motion.
can we have, I'm sorry, before we go, I'm really sort of struggling with some of these conversations because, you know, what we're talking about is these parcels which abut up to essentially contractors' yards. They butt to a railroad siding. They are, you know, I mean, for those of you who don't know the area, that whole area in the back used to be a contractor's yard, which was at one point Massey Construction. It is now a rental, heavy equipment rental place. There is a railroad siding there, which dumps stone multiple times a week, sometimes in the middle of the night. So I'm struggling to put some of the just strictly residential use abutting up to industrial uses. You know, I would argue there should be some sort of transitional use, you know, whether you want to call that industrial or something. To me, I'm voting no on these two parcels because it's just an incompatible use up against an industrial site. There's concrete silos back there. You know, there's tractor trailer traffic up and down Coates Lane and the other entrance. So again, I just find commercial to be incompatible with the adjacent property use there.
This is Barbara. Okay, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Barbara.
I really have a concern with this too. Do we really want Route 60 to be houses all the way up to New Kent County? I mean, this is a lot of residential to be even considering when is there really a need? And then I agree with what Frank's saying. You know, if you're backing up to an industrial area, why would you put housing there? And as soon as somebody buys a house there, then they get upset because trucks are on Coates Lane. I mean, I think it would be something like light industrial would be a better option for this property.
one of my concerns is that Richmond Road being a community character corridor, I'm a little concerned about light industrial and then starting to fill in with that sort of development. I'm looking at least in my mind, the low density residential as a future land use, saying, that doesn't mean, well, that's pretty much as low a density as you can on housing. And certainly you can pick which parts of those parcels that the houses would go in to, minimize the noise. But that was one of my concerns about the light industrial, was just because Richmond Road is a community character.
Well, how big are those parcels?
30 and 34 acres. So it's a total of 64 acres. And so as Paul pointed out, when we get to the legislative thing and we decide what's going to be there, you may have a huge buffer area there required.
Right.
But that, that's 64 acres. That's a hell of a lot of residents in there, which is why the open space piece to these suggestions for all three of them.
Sure.
This is Jack. I hear Tim. He's made some great points as usual. But if you have light industrial, how do you in there, which is intriguing? First of all, there's a pretty strict buffering requirement on community character corridors, except for industrial. I don't think there's.
Okay.
Ellen, help me here, but I think the buffering requirements are very limited, if any, on industrial property on community character corridors, number one. Okay. And number two, it's going to have to transition somewhere. If you're looking west, what's the next property over to the west? How's that going to be affected by a light industrial? I don't know.
But it's all industrial. I mean, from, you remember from Norge behind the Farm Fresh, you have railroad tracks. So to me, everything between Richmond Road and the railroad track should be some sort of commercial or industrial, because there's a few small houses.
Tim, I lost you there.
I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
So I'll try not to move inside the house. You got to remember, there's contractors' yards. There's a mulch. There's more concrete. Then you roll around right into the train yard and Hankins Industrial Park. So. I'm sort of the opinion that if we have a railroad siding, that's a great place to have, access to that sort of transportation piece. I mean, I live in, just for perspective, my backyard is Pumpkinville. So I look out my back window and I can watch the trains roll by. And so I see it daily, and I just feel that whole stretch is really more commercial, light industrial, and I think the heavy industrial stays in like Hankins Industrial Park.
Is this parcel too small for economic opportunity?
I don't believe the comp plan designation economic opportunity has any minimum recommended size. The zoning district EO might have a minimum. We could double check that, but I think it's typically 5 or 10 acres for some of those types of districts. So my inclination is to say it would be large enough for an EO zone. And like I said, for EO designation, I don't believe there's any minimum size to it.
Frank, did you have another comment?
I guess I'm losing the bubble here. Are we talking about 14 or 23, or where are we?
Now, I think now we're talking 23.
Okay. So we were in the middle of the vote for 14 when Tim asked the question, but then we got into 23. I'm just trying to see where we are.
No, my understanding is we voted on 14 for low density residential, and then we moved on to 23. Ellen, correct me if that isn't what transpired.
That's correct. Yeah, and I think in addition to the just differences in potential land use designation that those two applications represented, 23 did have one additional parcel as part of it. This was from the scenario B difference. If you look at what is highlighted on the map now, there was the parcel to the east, which is designated low density and moderate density. So if you've already voted on the one that has Coke's Lane going through it, maybe for this one you'd want to weigh in on whether or not you'd like to see a change to the parcel that's currently highlighted.
I'm sorry, Richard. The reason I'm confused about this is parcel 14 is the one that is backed up against all that industrial stuff that Tim has, while 23 isn't. I mean, so I'm looking at the map that I sent out everybody for both 14 and 23. So that's why I'm confused, because 23 isn't buffered up against all that industrial area that he was talking about.
Right. But 23 shares Coke's Lane, which has a lot of heavy traffic on it, both dump trucks and tractor trailers. That's why I was...
Yeah, but it's not where the rail is, and it's not where all the dumping is. So if we're talking about...
I mean, you guys go with your vote. I'm just voting no. I was explaining why. I don't really care.
All right. So right now, for parcel number 23, is there a recommendation? We've already voted on parcel 14 to have a staff study with the goal of low density residential in that area. We're now looking at parcel number 23, and we would need a motion as to how to move that one forward. And I understand, I think the intent of all this is to try to provide some buffering between Norge and Towano, so that area, as Jack discussed earlier, doesn't end up getting filled in with higher density residentials, with commercial, industrial, and so on and so forth, to start looking like Lightfoot. But I do understand some of Tim's concerns with the points that he was making. That said, is there a motion on what to do with parcel 23 as far as whether to move it forward or keep its existing land use designation?
Well, we're really discussing the alternative B recommendation to make this a higher density, right? We don't, and my understanding is that's one thing we don't want. Right. We want light industrial or low density housing. We certainly don't want higher density housing.
That's what I'm hearing from the group as well.
This is Julie. I move that we not move this parcel forward.
Okay, and just keep it as is?
Yes.
And the current land use designation for this parcel is, just as a reminder?
It's low density and mixed use, I think.
That's right. Okay. Well, we have a motion, so I'll ask staff to, Ellen, if you wanted to do the roll call on that.
Okay, and the motion is to leave the parcel as currently designated. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So, Mr. Kropp?
Aye.
Mr. Haldeman?
Aye.
Ms. Leverins?
Aye.
Ms. Knoll?
Aye.
Mr. O'Connor? Mr. O'Connor?
I'm sorry. Aye.
Okay. Mr. Polster?
Aye.
Ms. Wortman?
Aye.
Oh, okay. I apologize. I did that out of order. Dr. Rose?
Aye.
Thank you. Unanimous to leave it as is, so that would mean it would not continue to be explored. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen. Okay, Thomas, if you want to summarize the next item.
Sure. So number 15, this is the PCWG member recommendation, scenario B difference. It is for the Hill Pleasant Farm Economic Opportunity Area. And there's two sets that are here that are detailed within the spreadsheet. And for the first set, this set is not within the PSA. And the proposal would be, excuse me, I'm sorry, I'm scrolling through my spreadsheet here. Okay, so the first set is, I believe, not within the PSA, and it's designated for economic opportunity. And the proposal would be for it to become rural lands and outside of the PSA. The second set is economic opportunity within the PSA, and the proposal would be for it to be potentially not economic opportunity. I believe this is where we had left the discussion at our last meeting. And in the red text, staff had said that one choice could be to change to mixed use near the Croker interchange and limited industry near the pottery. And I'll turn it back over to you all for discussion.
All right. Tim, would you like to start off the discussion on this particular one?
Sure. I think I would probably be a bigger fan of leaving it as EO and adjusting the description. We have lots of these discussions, and I think the best part about EO is that folks have to bring a master plan forward. I also think that we need to look at some of these places. I have argued before. My personal opinion is that if we want to get into these communities in scenario B, that potentially we need to have higher than 15% residents. I don't see a benefit. It's land use, and I mean the current land use is mixed use, and if they want to keep farming it, they can. I'm not sure where the solar farm is, and so I would just be content to leave it as is.
And I'll be honest, I share your feelings as well. But Frank, you had your hand up first, and then Julie had your hand up as well.
Well, I've championed taking at least the first set of parcels that are in map ID first set completely out of the PSA. I mean, out of the EO period, and return it to rural. And I've made the argument about the traffic conditions that we have on Lightfoot. And I've made the argument that Moortown connector through there did nothing at all to solve the problem in 2040 for the Lightfoot Richmond or the Croker Richmond interchanges at all. Did nothing. On top of it, if anybody's traveled on Lightfoot Road lately and they see those apartments going up, we're going to see more of that, because right across the street there, that's all York County, and York County has designated all of that EO. And somewhere or another, they're going to develop it in the same way that they've developed the area that with the whole no zoning. So this is one that I don't understand why we would want to complicate a situation with the traffic that's already exasperated, let alone in 2045 for.
But Frank, just let me ask a counterpoint question. I mean, I understand the data set you're using for 2040, but unfortunately, we're in a vacuum. So don't we owe it to the folks who live in the county to not further exacerbate a bad situation that may be coming from adjacent development? I mean, the reality is, as you point out, if all that area gets developed, we're going to send people down Lightfoot Road to the Croker interchange, or we're in Croker and Lightfoot, or we're going to send them out to Lightfoot and Richmond Road. So, I mean, we're already handcuffing it. So why wouldn't we leave open the possibility where we already have an adopted consideration for a Moortown Road extension? I mean, why wouldn't we allow for the anticipation of that versus just shutting it down completely?
Jack has used a term that I think is really a good one. And what we're doing is inducing a problem that we know we have today. So when you take a look, not at 2040, but you look at the consultant team's analysis of Lightfoot Road already, it's severe, it's congested. Anything more you do will induce more of a problem. So if you know that now, why would you shoot yourself in the foot? We've gone through the point that there's nothing you can do about that CSX railroad, which is where the bottleneck is, and it backs up all the way to Moortown now without putting more in there. That induced concept is exactly why this needs to be pulled out, period. Now, I'm only talking about the first set. I haven't made up my mind about the second set, which is open for discussion. And by the way, for the staff, I think there's a parcel that I left you in my note that you left out of here, out of that first set, that should be also pulled out and put in the rural. So anyhow, that's where I am. On the second set, that's another conversation, and I'm willing to talk about that now if we're willing to move on to something else.
And just as a point of order,
using that logic, we shouldn't have approved the Wawa in the corner because we just made that whole intersection worse.
Exactly. And go back and look at the record and the guys that said no to that. And I was one of them. And we still have the option of going to what? Make a left-hand turn out of that Wawa? You got to be kidding. So we're going to wait till the VDOT guys decide that there shouldn't be a left turn out of that piece and only a right. And then we're going to have the conversation you were concerned about how do you get in and out of the place on 60. I mean, so, and there wasn't anything any of us could do because it's York County, not us. And that's the point. We have nothing to control any of what the York County does in that entire strip.
Okay, Ellen was going to, I think, ask for a point of order. Go ahead, Ellen.
Oh, I apologize for interrupting there. It was more actually just going to mention if the PCWG would like to take this in different chunks and vote on different chunks, I'd be glad to call out different votes and record different votes if that would be easier for the group than trying to vote. This has some different pieces with different things going on. I'd be glad to accommodate the PCWG in whatever is easiest.
Okay, thank you. Julie, you had your hand up, and then Jack.
Yes, thank you. I actually would support separating this into two groups. One of the things that I would like to see, and I haven't made up my mind yet, is that if we do approve economic opportunity for one of these parcels, I think we need to, or both of these parcels, I think we need to also extend the PSA to include them, the whole thing. So that's my opinion.
If I could just address that PSA extension, Julie, when this came up, this EO designation initially, one of the reluctance to pull it into the PSA before there was an approved master plan was to, by moving the parcels into the PSA, and then if EO never got traction or what have you, then you have all this rural land that was just pulled into the PSA. And the worry was that wouldn't be good, that the understanding was that, once there is an approved master plan for an EO project, then it would be pulled into the PSA. So that's just a
Well, then would it make sense? I mean, I just think it's silly to have an EO be partially in the PSA and partially not in the PSA. Although I guess there are utilities that are provided to this parcel, but I would almost be inclined to say it should be all in or all out.
Yeah. Of course, you know, EO is its future land use. Its current zoning is different. You know, it's the agricultural part and so on. So the idea was that if there's a future EO project, then into the PSA would be beneficial.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Sure.
Right, Julie. That was. I'm sorry. That was just part of the carrot when that EO designation was approved.
Right.
You know, it was bring a master plan, let the community and the Board of Supervisors approve that master plan. PSA. Nobody wanted to extend the PSA to then possibly have a different application come forward and a different request that wasn't EO.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense. Thank you very much, Tim.
Okay. Jack?
Hi, thanks. I have one point and one question, actually. I'm okay with an EO designation on this area if we don't connect Lightfoot Road and Croker Road with Moortown Road. If Moortown Road goes into this EO to service it, and then comes out onto Lightfoot, or better yet, onto Croker. I think it would be better to go into Croker, but not connect the two. Give the light industry access to I-64, which is a big draw. And that was one thing that always bothered me about this, was the connection, and Frank's point about induced demand. You're just going to facilitate more traffic by, build it and they will come. The other thing is there is a 15% residential limit on this, which I've never understood. I don't understand why you would need a residential component in EO. Understand it in mixed use, but EO should just be businesses, in my opinion. And part of the reason you want economic opportunity is to provide jobs for your residents, and your residents are already here, so they don't need to build new houses. And so anyway, those are my 2 points.
And just to clarify, I think during our discussions when we were visualizing what could potentially go in there that would, where residential would be helpful, Jack, is the concept of, say, a technology park where you had a research facility and say some of the researchers or the technicians or whatever would live in the community as well, and so that idea.
There's plenty of places for them to live.
Yeah, but I think that the idea was not to preclude it. In other words, by limiting it to no more than 15%, it was a way to give some flexibility to an EO project, but not have it go overboard with residential units. That's my recollection anyway. And Ginny, I think I see your hand was up.
Yes, I've got a question. So, Jack, do I understand that you said that you are okay with it being EO if the Moortown extension is scrapped?
Or truncated anyway, not scrapped. I mean, if you have an EO, you have to have access to it. And so that line, dotted line, yellow and black line running through could start at Croker Road and go into the EO and service it, but just not go all the way down to Lightfoot. Or my second and least favorite would be starting at Lightfoot and going in and servicing that area, but not going all the way through Croker. In other words, stop through traffic.
Right.
You could have the road go into service what's there, but not provide through traffic for people just passing through.
And is that something that we can specify in these votes, or is that a completely separate subject?
I don't know.
That was my question, Jenny. I was going to ask Paul or Ellen to weigh in on as to whether stipulating a Moortown Road extension is within our purview. We're just talking about a land use designation, but I wanted to get staff to weigh in on that.
I do think that the PCWG, the purview of the group is to comment on proposed roads like that Moortown Road extended. I think I might suggest, though, focusing on the land use designation for tonight. Typically that conversation and depictions of roads or character areas comes a little bit later in the process, if that was the comfort level of the PCWG. Yeah,
that's sort of what I was thinking as well. Let me just pause for a moment here because it's 5:30, and I'll let it up to the group. I'm looking out my window and it's totally overcast.
Yeah, nobody's going to see anything from my neighborhood, I'm afraid.
Right. So the intention was good, but I'd like to propose that we just forge forward on the discussion as opposed to the 15-minute recess. Is everybody all right with that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
All righty. Okay, back to the discussion then. Jenny, did you have anything else that you wanted to add to that?
No, I just forgot to put my hand down. Thank you for asking.
Okay. And I'll, if I can, just weigh in that I am in favor of leaving these parcels as they are currently designated on land use map for the reasons Tim articulated. I think leaving that as EO and also leaving the Moortown Road extension, not option, but concept in place also is something that I think would be beneficial. So whether we break this up into 2 votes, I think Frank suggested that initially, the first set of parcels outside the PSA and the second inside, I'm fine with that. But I just wanted to let you know that I am not in favor of moving this application forward.
Would
Frank,
you like me to call the roll? Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry.
I think I got my hand raised.
Yeah, I just said, Frank, you have your hand raised.
Yeah. On the issue of the Moortown Road, if the county went ahead and said, we just want the VDOT guys to construct the road that goes from Croker and stops on there, there's nothing to say that the York County guys, since it's a VDOT, don't go and pay for the connection from Moortown and in.
No, you could stop, Frank, you could stop our section, 100 yards short of York County, and that would be the end of that.
I think that's problematic considering that it's going to be state funding for this thing and the county's both in. I'm just offering that, but having said that, I'll shut up.
All right. Is there anybody else that has anything?
I would. Tim said something about adjusting the definition of economic opportunity land use designation. I think we don't want to lose track of that too.
Okay.
But whatever Tim had in mind, I think we need to capture it.
Tim, did you want to elaborate on that a little bit?
I didn't have anything particular in mind. It was just to remind everybody that, we capture the description. So if somebody had something in particular for the EO land use designation, we could capture it as part of that descriptor, which becomes part of the comp plan, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Is there a motion then going forward on this particular land use application? Do you want to have 2 votes, one on the outside the PSA and one inside the PSA?
I'd like to see 2 votes.
Go ahead, Frank.
like to see 2 votes on first section of the first set.
Okay. And would you just verbalize what your motion is for the change? Go ahead.
What I'd like to see is map ID first set, all of those items taken out of the EO and kept as all rural.
Okay. Ellen, would you call the roll on that one?
Certainly. Mr. Kraut?
No.
Mr. Haldeman?
Aye.
Ms. Leverins?
No.
Ms. Knoll?
No.
Mr. O'Connor?
No.
Mr. Colster? Mr. Colster?
I'm sorry, yes.
Thank you. Dr. Rose?
No.
Ms. Wortman?
I'm going to be difficult and abstain because I just don't feel like I know enough to make my vote mean anything.
Okay.
Great, thank you. That would not move forward for a change to rural lands based on the votes, if I've counted them correctly.
Okay.
You did.
You did. Frank, would you mind just verbalizing for the second set of parcels, because you did such a good job with that first one?
On the second set, I think there's 2 portions to that. And maybe it's irrelevant, but there were 3 parcels, 2 of which belonged to the pottery, and one of them belonged to the Jcsa, which is located in that area. And I was perfectly happy to keep those as both M1 and whatever. I mean, those I had no problem with in terms of staying within the PSA area and staying in the M1 piece. I had no problem with that. The other rest of those parcels in the second set, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 parcels which are up in that corner. I think it was worthwhile examining, as Tim was trying to suggest for the EO piece, is the language that you would use to describe what goes in there. And in the note that I passed along to everybody, I had taken out the language that describes that Croker interchange area. And the area that's left in the EO that we're talking about, that second set, is in the southeast quadrant. And my concern was that when you look at the language that's associated with all the other 3 quadrants, there's some very specific direction as to master planning, consideration on traffic, etc. And so if by going forward with the connecting road that goes from Croker into what you kept into the EO, you're talking about an issue of traversing through a bunch of land and private property, potentially given the different options that were in that study that are going to impact those homes in that area if you're not careful. And so I'm suggesting that the language that goes into those EO parcels in the second set is that it needs to be consistent with the language that's currently in the comp plan, so that we don't end up having a hodgepodge of how many parcels going off to do whatever they want. So if it does go in there on a vote, the master planning for all of those quadrants should be taken into consideration in consonant with the language that's already there. So I'm in favor of having this go forward, but with that proviso of looking at that language, as well as some thought about that connecting road and the other EO that would pass through there from staff.
So you're not advocating a land use designation change for that those parcels. You're just advocating a better description of the EO component?
Exactly, but it's consistent with the suggestion that Ellen had, that there are other ways to be able to control this by just a land use designation. You can put restrictions on there. So when you take a look at the language for those other three, there's some very much don't do this.
Okay. Let me ask Ellen procedurally the best approach. So what I'm hearing, do we need to first of all, vote on Frank's motion that says the properties retain the land use designation of EO, but that the working group craft better language for permissible and non-permissible items in those parcels?
I think if the group are comfortable with it, it wouldn't be something you all would need to vote on. You will all be provided the draft land use designation text at upcoming meetings, and we can look at it as staff certainly and make some recommendations of draft language, but certainly you all will have a chance to weigh in and if there's certain things that you would like to amend or revise about the current language, that would be fine. And as you say, that would not be a land use designation change where there's notification. The language of the designations can be tweaked kind of separate from an actual change process. So like I say, I don't know that you would need to vote on it unless you had a strong desire to.
That's where I was going with my question, is I felt that if the land use designation isn't changing, but we just want to be more definitive in a description, we'll do that as part of our administrative process when we address all the land use descriptions. Is everybody okay with that approach?
Yes.
Okay, I'll take silence as acquiescence. Then, and I can tell everybody's brain is starting to really become painful right now. So we'll go on to the next land use designation application. Thomas?
Sure. Yep, that's number 16. This is described as the parcels between Westport Subdivision and Centerville Road from low-density residential to rural lands. This is within the PSA. It's designated for low-density residential, and this proposal would be for it to be rural lands and outside the PSA.
All right.
This is Julie.
Jack,
could I just, in the interest of trying to save some time, I think this makes sense what Jack is proposing to take it out of the PSA. So I'd like to recommend that we move this one forward with that understanding.
I agree with that. This is Jimmy.
I agree with that, Barbara.
Any discussion contrary to that?
I guess it's Tim. I guess I would argue that if it was, I know it's currently zoned ag, but it was purchased to be developed. So the question becomes then, if you move it outside the PSA, do you guys want wells and septic systems? So my expectation is that that parcel would one day be developed in some form or fashion, whether it became a part of Westport, but it was certainly welcomed in to be a part of Ford's Colony. So again, if the expectation is there, are you all willing to support yet another well and septic system?
I personally am not in favor of pulling that out of the PSA because I don't know how many undeveloped properties are in there where people bought with the expectation that it was inside the PSA. It is low density residential right now, and I And I do have some concerns about, which we'll be discussing, down the road very shortly, about communal wells, about septic, and so on and so forth. So I just wanted to, before we have a motion and a vote, I just wanted to say that I would not be in favor of moving this application forward.
This is Jack. I obviously am, but there were, in the Westport application, there were 80 some homes proposed, 85, 86, something like that. Mm-hmm. With regard to the well and the septic systems, which I think we're all concerned about, Westport, which if you look at the map, goes directly west of this parcel. It extends. It's kind of narrow, but extends deep into the green area, and it had a large central well and obviously septic system. So that's already there. Now, I assume, well, I don't assume anything, but if this area were to become rural lands, I guess it could extend onto the Westport well, central well. And yes, they'd have to have septic systems. But that subject's gonna come up later on, as I understand it. We have to talk about that and how they're handled. I just think, the PSA runs right down Centerville Road. Centerville Road is already stressed traffic-wise. It's a wooded community character corridor. It says very explicitly in the comprehensive plan that residential development west of Centerville Road should be discouraged. And this whole, it's just visually, how did that happen? I would love to have been a fly on the wall when they drew this PSA and put that little bump out into the rural lands. I don't understand it, but anyway, that's my story. I'm sticking to it.
Okay. And I think, well, I don't see any more hands up, but Julie, you made a motion initially, so and then we detoured. So did you want to make that motion again?
Yes, my motion is that we accept or move this forward with the goal of designated as rural lands outside the PSA.
Okay. Ellen, would you mind calling the roll for that?
Certainly. Mr. Kropp?
No.
Mr. Haldeman?
Yes.
Ms. Leverins?
Yes.
Ms. Knoll?
Yes.
Mr. O'Connor?
No.
Mr. Polster?
Yes.
Dr. Rose?
Yes.
Ms. Wortman?
Yes.
It appears to me the numbers would indicate continuing to explore this change.
Okie doke. Thank you. Thomas?
I'm here. Sorry about that.
That's
I'm a little trouble.
We all are.
I had a little trouble with my phone there. I just wanted to double check which number we were on. We were moving on to number 17. This was a member recommendation for Anderson's Corner. This is 12 or so parcels, including Taylor Farm, and this property is within the PSA. It's currently designated for mixed use, economic opportunity, and at your last meeting, you had a lot of great discussion about this. And what staff had put, in addition to not mixed use or economic opportunity, was a summary that says in red, discussion by the working group appeared to lean towards establishing a clearer vision, which could potentially be achieved through revising the language of the existing designation. And so that's where we are on that one, and I'll turn it back over to you all.
Okay, thank you. And just to clarification, is this the more definitive language? Is this the same type of discussion that we just had for the EO piece, or is that what you were referring to, Thomas?
Yes. So in the previous meeting, a lot of the discussion had been about establishing a clear vision. And I believe there was some discussion about changing the language. So rather than pick a new land use designation, staff just put forward that potentially you could just revise the existing description for the mixed use or the economic opportunity to better establish that vision rather than changing the land use. But it's up to you all how to proceed, of course.
Sure. Let's see, Julie.
Yes, thank you. My understanding from the last discussion, I think Frank spent quite a bit of time talking about how we really need to define our vision for specific areas. And so both of these, this and the next one, the Croker interchange, along the idea of the community character areas, to define additional requirements for these areas and what we want them to look like. But that would be outside of the land use designation.
Okay.
Is that right, Frank?
Yeah, and just to add to it is, I think the real issue of contention is actually 5 parcels that are on the southeast quadrant of that road, which are now not mixed use, they're low density residential. And so if you took those parcels and you made them mixed use, all you're doing is adding more to the issues about those 4 quadrants. And once again, in the note that I sent out to everybody, I thought that the staff in its mixed-use development standards on Anderson Corner had hit it about right for the 3 quadrants that are already in a mixed-use area. But adding in what is low residential in that southeast corner and not necessarily having the language that gets to, once again, the traffic issue. And what it talks about is not having entry into those parcels from the main roads. So I'm interested to hear on how we would solve that issue of those 4 parcels that are over by the Whitehall development and not aggravate what already is going to be a busy area once it's developed out. Thank you, Julie.
To Julie's point about a vision, the comprehensive plan does have a vision for Anderson's Corner. It's just briefly 2 sentences, but Anderson's Corner is one of the few remaining areas in the PSA with significant rural agricultural vistas and contains one of the few remaining rural historic structures in the county, the Whitehall Tavern. Future development should maintain an appropriate historic setting for the Whitehall Tavern and preserve the rural historic character of the area. That's, of the vision that currently exists in the comprehensive plan for Anderson's Corner.
And this might be a good example of a parcel that we discussed earlier in the meeting about is the designation community character conservation an appropriate use that would, because it is inside the PSA, and to Frank's point, there seem to be some larger issues. So, Frank, if I'm understanding you correctly, you're advocating moving this forward for discussion as to the land use designation, as well as addressing some of the issues that would potentially come with that, in the form of traffic congestion and so on. Is that what I'm hearing?
Right, and if you go to the next paragraph that Jack quoted, it says views from Richmond Road, Route 60, and Route 30 should receive high priority to accomplish this significant amounts of open lands, farm fields should be preserved along with agricultural and rural structures in a manner that creates a village commercial node that is integrated with surrounding residential development. And so if you go in there and you put mixed use into that quadrant, you're going to violate that. So whatever we decide on those 4 parcels being added ought to maintain to that standard that we have in the comp plan currently.
Okay. Tim, you had your hand up.
Just to clarify, so Frank, you're talking about the parcel between the Whitehall development and the intersection of Rochambeau and 60, correct?
Tim, there's actually 5 parcels. Those are the 4 of them are the Walker pieces, and the other one is the Brother Ivy, which is the gal that we just did the tourist home for, and then the other parcel actually belongs to the Whitehall. But those are all those parcels that I'm talking about, and those are the additions to that. Everything else is okay.
And so and I think to partly answer your question, and perhaps Paul or Ellen or somebody can clarify, I believe that there are, the way that Whitehall was developed, there are 2 locations, one sort of where the one is and the other is 2, to create interconnectivity between those parcels. So I believe there's the ability to kind of support that whole neighborhood commercial concept, if you will. I believe that there is the ability to connect directly to Whitehall, so that commercial would have access to those homes, or the homes would have access to the commercial piece without ever having to get onto Rochambeau or Route 60.
Tim, you're right, as opposed to the other 3 quadrants, but that quadrant wasn't part of the standard. And it does say master planning for each of the mixed-use intersection quadrants with an adjacent existing and future residential development is strongly encouraged with the use of shared access points with the primary considerations. And that is my concern, that we don't dump it onto 30 and 60.
Right. Well, I'm just suggesting that for that one, for that corner that you're talking, so there are 2 ways to connect from Whitehall to that parcel without ever getting out of there. So that's all.
Right. And my other point is that there's some other specific language in there as to what the widths and lengths are. And those are the sort of things that I'd like to see enforced, and the language to stay as it is.
Jack?
The other point here, I think, besides preserving that vision, is the proximity of 3 other mixed-use districts to this. And I made this point at an earlier meeting, but exit 227, the Barnesville is a major mixed-use area. It's only, I forget, 3 miles down Barnesville Road. The Croker Interchange, another very large mixed use, and then the Tawano mixed use area is only 2 miles down the road. There's no reason to have 4 mixed use areas under such a small blanket. I think if you put at Anderson's Corner something like a neighborhood commercial, which is much smaller scale, of course, but still something that could service the immediate neighborhood, maybe a convenience center and a small restaurant and a couple of shops. It wouldn't insult the vision, would provide a little bit of service for the local neighborhoods, and you could still have the economic potential of the other 3 mixed-use areas within a fairly short drive, no more than a 5-minute drive away.
Well, what I'm hearing is the discussion right now, the comprehensive plan has that section for mixed use / economic opportunity. And I'm hearing enough discussion about whether those 2 are appropriate, whether mixed use is appropriate, whether community conservation would be better. So what I'm hearing is a consensus to move this application forward to discuss in more detail what the land use designation should be, that there's not necessarily a specific one. This should be redesignated as such and such, but there's enough question that we want to do get a staff report and have more in-depth discussions. Am I correct in assuming that?
I think with a caveat that you're talking about both map ID 21 and 17 when you say that.
Okay, good. Is everybody all right with that? And Ginny, you had your hand up. You just put your hand up.
I was just going to ask the question about 21, so I'm taking my hand down.
Okay. All right. So in the motion that would be on the table would then be to take items 17 and 21, bundle them together and move them forward for some additional analysis and discussion as to what would be the best land use designations. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. With that on the table, we'll consider that a motion maybe. And Ellen, if you would call the roll on that.
Sorry, I'm just trying to think in terms of notifying the property owners what we would be letting them know. I know, I suppose the letter could say, you know, just something other than what it is currently.
Right.
And list the designations that you all have spoken about tonight, which would be neighborhood, commercial, the open space. I think those were the two alternatives that you discussed. Is that right?
And also keeping it as is would still be on the table as well, is my understanding.
Okay.
Yeah,
all right.
Yeah, I thought we were talking about just sort of changing or making the descriptions for mixed use and EO more descriptive, or, you know, more prescriptive, I guess is probably the better word.
Yeah, if I could jump in real quick, I think for 21, the proposal, because this was a scenario B difference, that was to go from low density residential and general industry to mixed use. And for the one we're discussing further up, which I think is 17, unless I've gotten totally mixed up, yes, it's 17.
17. Yeah.
It could be that if you went ahead with 21 with the caveat that we'd also re-examine the mixed use designation in light of 21 being potentially added, because that would add the amount of acreage to that part of Anderson's Corner. So that could be an option, not trying to push you either way, but it might be a neater way where staff has a note to re-examine the Anderson Corner area and those descriptions, and certainly we'd revisit that in the future. But then the actual land use designation change would be 21, where those parcels are being added. And then the designation the designation description, a lot of words there, would be reviewed in light of that potential addition. That could be an option. I just wanted to throw that out there in case that was something you wanted to think about.
Hey, Tom, this is Frank, but you've got two parcels in 21 that are duplicate in 17. So when you go to notify them, how do you tell them that you got different stories?
Well, I'd have to look at the parcels, but if the land use change wasn't occurring, and I don't have the GIS pulled up in front of me right now, but so if the land use, if the parcel ID was remaining mixed use, we wouldn't necessarily have to notify them, but I think it would be good practice just to let property owners in that area know exactly what's being proposed for. And I think that's what Ellen was getting at a little bit, is that it's really helpful to have a specific land use designation in mind when we send these letters out, so that people know exactly what we're thinking about. But that's a good question.
So what you threw out there, Thomas, is for 17, don't just keep that land use designation as is, with the understanding that when we get to the workload tasks of reviewing land use designations, we put something more specific in for Anderson's Corner, but that 21 is really the only one that would have a land use designation change conceivably. Did I translate that right?
Yeah, essentially, yeah. I was trying to synthesize some of your thoughts, because I think the parcels that Mr. Poulter was talking about in particular that are adjacent to Anderson's Corner are not part of 17, and I'd have to double check, but I think they are listed within 21.
Okay.
But it's just an option in case it's helpful. Certainly not something you have to go with.
Well, that sounds attractive to me, and I think to Tim's point, 17 would be handled the same way the Hill Pleasant Farm piece is, where we're just looking at better descriptors for that particular EO vision. And so that wouldn't go forward, but the 21 would. Is everybody okay?
That's true for, I don't think that's true for 2 of the parcels in 21. In 21, you're trying to make the Brothers property and the Ware Creek and the Anderson mixed use. And they're currently A1 and low density residential. And they show up in 17. So I don't know how you do that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I guess maybe we can go back and double check the parcels, but I guess conceptually what Thomas is suggesting is for the areas that are currently already designated mixed use and already designated EO, if you'd like to consider leaving those designations in place as they are and revising the language, that would be a first set of considerations. And then for those additional parcels that are right now not designated mixed use or EO, that where the scenario be different, if you'd like to consider changing those to mixed use, that would be a vote to explore that.
And I would be okay with that, Alan, as long as we get the point in there about the standards for those additions.
Right.
In the southeast corner, quadrant.
Any other discussion on that? Okay, so what I'm hearing on the table is a proposal just to let 17 stay as is, with the understanding that we'll beef up the definition and move 21 forward to have a further analysis as to looking at making that parcel mixed use. All right. If everybody's all right with that, do you want to do a roll call vote, Ellen?
Yes, Mr. Kopp.
Which one are we voting on? I'm sorry.
Well, only on 21 because.
Sure enough.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Actually, to be clean, why don't we vote 17 first to leave it as is and just beef up the description as part of the review process. So we'll do that just to make this all very clean and transparent. So that's what's on the table right now. And we're only voting on 17. Ellen?
Mr. Kropp?
Aye.
Mr. Haldeman?
No.
Ms. Leverns?
Aye.
Ms. Knoll?
Aye.
Mr. O'Connor?
Aye.
Mr. Polster?
No.
Dr. Rose?
Aye.
Ms. Wortman?
No.
It looks as though the number of votes would indicate leaving the designation as is.
But beefing up the description.
Yes, yeah, with language amendments. Yes. Would you like me to call the roll for 21?
Please. And that is to make to do a staff analysis with the idea of mixed use for 21. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Mr. Kropp?
Aye.
Mr. Haldeman?
No.
Ms. Leverns? Ms. Leverns?
Sorry. Aye.
Ms. Knoll?
Aye.
Mr. O'Connor?
Aye.
Mr. Polster?
Aye.
Dr. Rose?
Aye.
Ms. Wortman?
No.
The vote indicates moving forward with considering that change.
All right. let's see, there's a few more. How many more, Thomas? I just lost track of my spreadsheet.
8.
Eight more. Let me just throw this out there for the group. We meet again on January 5th, and this may throw a monkey wrench into the staff's timeline as well. But I'm just wondering at this point if it wouldn't be worth pausing and take the extra 8 under consideration on January the 5th when we meet. What are the thoughts on that? Go ahead, Ellen.
If I could ask for Tammy's help as part of this, I think we might have some constraints as far as preparing the instrument for gathering public input for round 3, but unfortunately, I'm not remembering the exact dates. Tammy, do you have any thoughts about whether the timing would permit that?
Sure. We have the Land Use Map Questionnaire going live on January 25th, and I'm not sure the development schedule with GIS folks, but I know we are trying to do a test run with the CPT on the 11th, and typically those materials would go out on the 4th. So if we did a test run, so to speak, on the ones that we have available, it just wouldn't be the whole set. And I'll leave it to you to know what the development schedule is like.
So we could conceivably kick these 8 to the January 5th meeting then.
I think so, Ellen. If in particular, you think that we could get the structure of the questionnaire worked out and all of the other ones set up, and then only had the 8 remaining ones to pull together after the 5th. It's just an idea.
What does the working group think? Is everybody pretty much at a point where they want to stop, or do you want to forge forward?
This is Julie. I think it would be worthwhile for us to go ahead and do number 18 because that's the Croker interchange, and we've just been talking about Anderson's Corner.
Okay.
And we might be able to knock that one out pretty quickly.
All right. Why don't we do that then? We'll do number 18 and then do a pause at that point, and we'll pick up on January 5th with the remainder because I think the longer it's 6:10 now, or a little after 6:10, and and I don't want to keep people here till 6:45 or 7 o'clock at night. I think we're going to lose our effectiveness. So, Thomas, if you want to kick off item number 18, we'll.
Rich, could I?
Yep.
Rich, it's Tim. I'm sorry. Could I suggest that we just, if we're gonna separate the two, personally, I would vote just to forge ahead, because I'd like to get it done. But if we're gonna take a break, then I would say let's get through the PCWG recommended pieces, so that would just leave us the scenario B to consider on January 5th. I think we would just have number 19 to go as well, which is the parcel across from Windsor Mead.
Okay, 18 and 19.
I agree with Tim.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
That does make sense. Everybody, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay.
We've already ruined the cocktail hour, so.
Well, we're not on camera, Jack, so that shouldn't stop you at all.
That's right.
All right, we'll do 18 and 19. So, Thomas, if you want to.
Sure. Number 18, this is a member recommendation. It's described as the Croker interchange, and it's located within the PSA. It's currently designated for mixed use, and we have it as potentially not mixed use. And in red, it states that the discussion appeared to focus on working towards establishing a clearer vision, which could potentially be accomplished through revisions to the existing mixed use designation language. And I'll turn it over to you all.
All right, discussion? Frank?
I think there are three of those parcels, I should say, three of the parcels that I don't know why they're in this mixed use piece. And they're the Historic Land Conservancy parcel that's around the golf course, and the other one's the Williamsburg Land Conservancy of 43 acres. It's in a conservancy. And then there's the mixed use piece for the golf course, which it's an R5, so I don't know why we think that those ought to be mixed use. Other than that, I'm okay with the rest of the parcels and the language, obviously.
Okay.
The Rich and I were on the board of the Land Conservancy when this was done. This parcel was originally intended to be timeshares, and was owned by the Hankins family, and the Hankins family graciously donated it to the Land Conservancy. There's a perpetual conservation easement on it, not the golf course, just the area around the golf course. So to Frank's point, it'll never be developed, and doesn't make any sense to be in mixed use.
Yeah, I agree. Frank, did you have your hand up again?
No, I forgot to bring it down.
That's okay. Any other discussion? In that case, is there a motion?
Well, I'll make a motion that this thing not go forward, except that we delete the three parcels that are in the conservancy or in the golf course from the mixed use area.
Ellen, is that permissible?
Yeah. Well, I think it might be. It sounds as though you all are looking at that area that has the 5B label on it in particular. And from what I'm hearing, it sounds as though there's not a focus on wishing to change the area that's labeled 5A. But if that's the case for 5B, we could. We would probably, again, look to you all to see if there's a designation you think would be more appropriate, like a limited industry for a portion that's currently in I think it's a resource extraction use, or there may be a few uses on that property. But if it's not going to be mixed use, we probably would need to work with you and what the alternative would be.
Julie, it sounds to me like we do need to move this forward because there may be some changes. I mean, even changing it to open space for the conservancy portions would in fact be a land use change. So 5B probably should go forward.
And so this is Paul. Did I understand the motion correctly, that it would effectively be leaving 5A and 5B as mixed use with the exception of the 3 preservation parcels, which would be changed to an open space or some other protective, or at least taken out of the mixed use designation?
That was my idea, Paul.
Yeah, I definitely heard that, take the 3 protected parcels out of that designation.
Okay. That was a good clarification. I think I could call a roll on that. Thank you. If that suited you all.
So is it moving forward or not?
Go ahead, Ellen. The motion would be to?
It would leave the area labeled 5B as mixed use other than for the parcels that are under conservation easement. And it sounds like in that case, the new land use designation would be like an open space designation.
For the conservation parcels.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And so this is something that would move forward then, correct? Is this an
for exploration. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, if you all voted that way, yes.
In other words, those 3 conservation parcels can't just be pulled out administratively. They would have to move forward with this land use application. Am I understanding that correctly?
I mean, I guess just to, sorry, go ahead.
Aren't we just moving this forward for staff consideration and with staff's understanding that we're only talking about those 3 parcels?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was my question exactly, Jack. That that if we move it, do we move it forward, or is it just an administrative removal? But I guess procedurally, the vote would be to move it forward for staff to assess removing the conservation packages.
And then everything else would stay mixed use. Is that?
That's what I'm hearing from the discussion. Yes.
Thanks for that clarification.
If everybody's, that's everybody's understanding, then Ellen, would you go ahead and call the roll on that one?
Mr. Kropp?
Aye.
Mr. Haldeman?
Aye.
Ms. Leverins?
Aye.
Ms. Knoll?
Aye.
Mr. O'Connor?
Aye.
Mr. Polster?
Aye.
Dr. Rose?
Aye.
Ms. Wortman?
Aye.
Thank you. The votes indicate exploring a change to those 3 parcels away from mixed use to open space.
Okay, thank you. Finally, number 19.
Yep, these are the parcels across from Windsor Mead Marketplace. They are within the PSA. They are designated for neighborhood commercial, and the proposed language states not neighborhood commercial, and in parentheses, discussion at the meeting included potentially a revised version of the open space or recreation, which we discussed earlier tonight. And if the working group decides open space designation is not a good fit, and if the desire were to not have commercial in this location, a residential designation choices include low density residential or moderate density residential. And if commercial would be acceptable, the current neighborhood commercial designation would likely remain the best fit. And I believe John does have the spreadsheet available if people need to read that for themselves. I know it's a bit verbose, but those are the options we have laid out in the spreadsheet.
All right, and so just to clarify, there are some residential units around that parcel, if I remember correctly, because that came up as a planning commission case a year or so ago. So, yes, and so those are they part of number 19, or are they outside of 19, those 4 units?
They would be part of it, I would think.
Okay. All right. Tim, you had your hand up. And then Julie.
Just a question. I know Julie is the one that I think that put it forward. I didn't participate in the discussion, but Jack had given us a really good summary as an autopsy. I was just really curious from those who heard that case was, I mean, my reservation was when we were talking about neighborhood commercial was that we were going to add additional retail and less parking. And I just didn't like the layout. So is the issue that, and Julie, you can answer that question, is the issue that we're opposed to keeping it in some sort of commercial fashion, or because it's at an intersection, it just seems an appropriate place to me to keep it some sort of commercial use.
Yes, and I agree. That was the crux of the matter, is that everybody was objecting to the additional traffic and commerce and retail on Monticello Avenue. I would not object to changing it back to to low density residential or open space. I mean, basically it's low density residential right now, and presumably the residential would open onto Ironbound Road, and that would be fine.
That's, I'm sorry, this is Jack. That's correct. It is residential now, and it does, the 4 houses do face Ironbound. The problem is, to me, the problem is, and my guess is the problem for the 4 property owners, is the value of these homes as residences was stripped when Monticello Avenue was put in and 199 was put in, and then all the property behind it was clear cut and paved over. This used to be, well, it's rural residential, and it used to be rural and residential, but it's not anymore. And those houses are worthless. I mean, I can't imagine anybody wanting to live at the elbow of 199 and Monticello Avenue. And it was pointed out at the meeting that this section of Monticello Avenue, specifically from 199 to News Road, is the most accident-prone section of road in James City County. The distance between the exit ramp from 199 east to the first light at Windsor Mead is inadequate, and they were going to put in a left-hand turn at that light going into this new commercial development, which would have made it even worse. People coming eastbound 199 exiting would have to cross 2 lanes of traffic to get to the left-hand turn lane, and they only have a couple hundred yards to do it. The same situation already exists from the westbound 199 exit to people trying to get into the Walmart headed in the other direction, and you only have a couple hundred yards to negotiate 2 lanes of traffic to get into the left-hand turn lane. So, and then the 2035 comprehensive plan projects a 15% increase in traffic between News Road and 199 on this section. So it's just a very poorly designed road. The other thing is on eastbound Monticello from News Road to 190, or from News Road, the first section is News Road to Monticello Market. Traffic light is probably only 150 yards, and it already fills that section at certain times in the day. And as I said, the projection is for ever more traffic. So we declined a perfectly fine commercial neighborhood application. It fit in all respects. The comprehensive plan commercial neighborhood commercial description. We denied it for all those reasons. So the property owners have been stripped of the value of their property as residences, and then we told them they couldn't develop it for its intended purpose. And so what are these people to do? You can't put industrial in there. You can't put a hotel.
Well, looking just at the future land use designation, Jack, what would you advocate for that parcel?
I did. If you read my application, I kind of stumbled over that very same question, Rich. I wasn't sure until we came up with this new
community
conservation thing. And I think the county has to buy this property and put that in, or make it a pocket park or something to make these people whole. We've effectively stolen their property, I think, and it's don't put that in a minute, somebody, but we just have to fix this, and it's undevelopable now. If we're not going to have neighborhood commercial, and it can't remain residential, there's no other possible.
This is Julie. Is it too narrow to do anything with moderate or high density? That would still open onto Ironbound Road?
Yeah, I think so.
Because, I mean, in terms of access to bus stops and all that, it would be ideal.
Mm-hmm.
It's already congested.
Yeah, I'm sort of the opinion, just look, because of some of the points Jack articulated as far as its location, and it's in a very high density traffic area, that I think I tend to go towards the community character conservation idea. But I guess what I'm saying is I agree with moving this one forward, and we could look at, a couple of the options, but.
I agree.
Julie, since this was yours to begin with, would you like to make an option or a motion?
Sure. I'd like to recommend that we move this one forward with an eye towards a either open space or or turn it back into, which I presume it was at some point, low density residential, which it is in terms of zoning, which it is now.
Mm-hmm. All right. So we have a motion to move it forward with and looking at the two options of the open space or low density residential. Ellen, if you'd like to call the roll on that one.
Yes, Mr. Kropp.
Aye.
Mr. Haldeman.
Aye.
Ms. Leverins.
Aye.
Ms. Knoll.
Aye.
Mr. O'Connor.
No.
Mr. Colster.
Aye.
Dr. Rose.
Aye.
Ms. Wortman.
Aye.
So the votes indicate continuing to explore a change to open space or LDR.
Thank you. Thank you all. We'll pause here on land use. Are there any other items for discussion before we move on? Seeing none, in that case, I will ask for a motion to adjourn to the January 5th, 2021 PC Working Group meeting at 4 p.m. And just a reminder, that's a Tuesday rather than a Monday due to the Board of Supervisors holding their annual organizational meeting. So a motion to adjourn to January 5th at 4 p.m.
So moved.
Thank you, Barbara. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None. All right. Well, everybody have a Merry Christmas, and hopefully when we get together in 2021, that'll be the start of a much better year than 2020 was.
Amen to that.
All right. Y'all have a good evening.
All the best, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.